My mother-in-law brought another woman to our Christmas dinner, announcing her as my husband's new partner while I stood in the kitchen. They thought I was a guest in my own home until I revealed who actually owned the deed. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fever felt like a heavy, wet wool blanket pressed against my skin. I lay in the master suite of the Gables, the house I had spent the last 3 years of my life resurrecting from the dead. Outside the expansive leaded glass windows, a brutal December wind whipped through the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks, but inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive pine and the faint, lingering aroma of the floor wax I'd applied by hand only 2 days ago. I should have been downstairs. It was Christmas Eve, and the Vance family tradition dictated that the house be glowing, the table be set for 12, and the hostess be radiant. Instead, I was shivering under 4 layers of bedding, my throat feeling like I'd swallowed a handful of dry gravel. I heard the door creak open. I expected Owen to be carrying a tray, perhaps some ginger tea, or even just a glass of water. We had been married for 8 years, and while things had been strained lately, surely a flu on Christmas would trigger some vestige of the man I'd married. Owen stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing his lounging clothes. He was dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit that I had bought him for his birthday. His hair was perfectly slicked back, and he smelled of that heavy, woody cologne that always made me sneeze. He didn't come to the bedside. He stood by the dresser, checking his reflection in the antique mirror I had painstakingly restored from a flea market find. "You're still in bed," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Owen, I can barely sit up," I rasped, my voice cracking. "The thermometer hit 102 an hour ago. I think I need to see a doctor if it doesn't break by morning." He sighed, a long, theatrical sound of profound inconvenience. He didn't look at me, he looked at his gold watch. "Mother is going to be here in 20 minutes. The guests are arriving at 6. You know how important this dinner is for her. She's been talking about this grand homecoming for months." "I know," I whispered, a tear stinging my eye. "I did the prep. The turkey is stuffed, the sides are in the fridge, the table is laid. All you have to do is put the bird in the oven. I can't be the one to serve it tonight." Owen finally turned to look at me, but there was no warmth in his eyes. There was a strange, chilling detachment, a look I'd seen more frequently over the last 6 months, usually right before he had a late meeting with a client. "I can't be expected to run a kitchen, Caroline," he said coldly. "I have roles to play tonight, responsibilities. If you can't fulfill yours, then stay up here. Just stay out of the way. I don't want the guests seeing you looking like this." He gestured vaguely at my pale, sweating face and tangled hair. He turned on his heel and walked out, the click of the door feeling like a gavel. 10 minutes later, as I lay there in a daze of heat and heartbreak, I heard the front door chime. Then I heard the unmistakable, shrill vibrato of my mother-in-law, Beatrice. "Owen, darling, look at you, the master of the house." I managed to roll out of bed, my legs feeling like jelly. I needed water. I needed to know why Owen was acting like I was an embarrassment rather than his sick wife. I crept to the top of the grand staircase, the one I had sanded down until my fingers bled, and looked through the banisters. Beatrice was in the foyer, draped in a mink coat that she definitely couldn't afford on her own. Beside her stood a younger woman. She was strikingly beautiful in a fragile, curated way, long blonde hair, a cream-colored silk dress, and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for years. "And here she is," Beatrice proclaimed, gesturing to the young woman. "Owen, you remember Haley. Her father and I go way back. Isn't she just the vision of what this house needs? A fresh start. A proper legacy." I watched, my breath catching in my scorched throat, as Owen took Haley's hand and kissed it. He didn't look like a man with a sick wife upstairs. He looked like a man who had already moved on. "She's perfect, Mother," Owen said softly. "Absolutely perfect." I gripped the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. I retreated back into the shadows of the hallway before they could look up. I made it back to the bed, but the fever no longer felt like the primary source of my heat. It was a slow, simmering rage that began to clear the fog in my brain. I lay there for an hour, listening to the sounds of the party rising through the floorboards. The clinking of crystal, the bursts of forced laughter, the smell of the rosemary-rubbed turkey that I had prepared, now being enjoyed by people who looked at me as an obstacle. Around 7:30 p.m., I heard the heavy clack-clack-clack of Beatrice's heels approaching my door. She didn't knock. She simply pushed it open and stood there, silhouetted against the hall light like a Victorian villain. "Oh, you are awake," she said, her voice dripping with a false, saccharine concern that wouldn't have fooled a child. "Owen told me you were under the weather. It's such a shame. Tonight is such a pivotal moment for the Vance name." "It's a flu, Beatrice," I said, sitting up and pulling a shawl around my shoulders. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. "And last I checked, my name is on the marriage license. Why is there a stranger in my foyer being introduced as a fresh start?" Beatrice walked further into the room, her eyes scanning the expensive moldings and the antique furnishings. She ran a gloved finger over the surface of my vanity. "Caroline, dear, let's not be tedious. We all know this arrangement has run its course. Owen needs someone who fits, someone who understands the weight of being a Vance. Haley is from the right circles. Her family understands how these things work." "How what things work?" I asked, my voice steadying. "Adultery, disrespect. I'm the one who rebuilt this family's reputation while Owen was consulting his way through our savings." Beatrice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You were a means to an end. You have a talent for fixing things. You fixed the house. You fixed the finances. But you can't fix the fact that you'll never truly be one of us. Owen is tired of feeling like a guest in his own life. He wants his inheritance back. He wants the life he was promised." His inheritance. I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up. The Vances lost everything 10 years ago. This house was a foreclosure. It was a ruin with a for sale sign and a leaking roof. "And now it's the Gables again," Beatrice snapped, her facade finally cracking. "And it belongs to a Vance. Owen has already started the paperwork, Caroline. He's been very clear. He wants a divorce and he's taking the house. He's already told Haley it's hers to redecorate. She wants to paint over all this, dark wood. She says it's too heavy." I looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't intimidated by her pearls or her pedigree. I saw a desperate woman clinging to a ghost. "He's taking the house." I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "As is his right," she said, turning toward the door. "Be a dear and stay up here. Don't make a scene. We'll have the papers sent to you after the holidays. It's better this way. You'll get a nice little settlement, I'm sure, enough for a small apartment somewhere." She closed the door behind her. I sat in the dark for a long time. My chest ached, not from the cough, but from the sheer audacity of their delusion. Owen had spent months telling his mother, and apparently this Haley girl, that he was the one who had redeemed the family estate. He had played the part of the wealthy scion so well that he'd started to believe his own lies. He had forgotten one crucial thing. I stood up and walked to the small built-in safe hidden behind a panel in my closet. My hands were steady now. I punched in the code, our wedding anniversary, ironically, and pulled out a thick navy blue folder. Inside was the deed to the Gables. I flipped to the signature page. I stared at the name written in elegant, decisive script. Caroline Miller, not Vance. When I bought this place, I didn't use our joint account. I used the inheritance from my grandmother and the profits from my furniture business. Money Owen had never touched because he thought it was hobby money. I had put the house in a private trust, with me as the sole beneficiary, to protect it from the very creditors Owen had been running from years ago. I tucked the folder under my arm. The fever was gone, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. They wanted a performance. They wanted a grand homecoming. I was going to give them a finale they would never forget. I spent the next hour transforming myself. I scrubbed the sweat from my face, applied enough makeup to hide the paleness of my skin, and stepped into my most formidable dress. A deep, emerald green velvet that made me look like the mistress of a manor, not a sick woman hiding in the attic. As I dressed, I thought about the thousands of hours I'd poured into this house. I remembered the winter Owens spent in St. Moritz networking, while I stayed here in a parka, hand-scraping the lead paint off the dining room wainscoting. I remembered the night the water heater burst, and I was the one in the basement in knee-deep water because Owen couldn't stand the smell of damp. Every sacrifice I had made was for a future I thought we were building together. I had saved his family's dignity from the gutter, and in return they were trying to sweep me out with the trash. I walked to the top of the stairs and paused. The dining room was visible from the mezzanine. The table was glowing with candlelight. Beatrice was at the head, presiding over the meal like a queen mother. Owen was at the other end, laughing at something Haley said. Haley was leaning into him, her hand resting on his arm in a way that screamed possession. There were 8 other guests, Beatrice's elite friends. They were the kind of people who spent their lives discussing polo matches they didn't play and charities they didn't actually fund. I descended the stairs slowly. The clack of my heels on the marble foyer silenced the room. Owen's head snapped up. His face went through a fascinating series of colors, pale, then flushed, then a sickly gray. "Caroline," he stammered, half rising from his chair, "I thought you were asleep." "I was," I said, my voice projecting with a clarity that surprised even me. I walked into the dining room, the emerald velvet trailing behind me. But I realized it's Christmas. It would be terribly rude of the hostess to miss the announcement of a fresh start for the Vance family. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "Caroline, dear, you're clearly delirious. You should go back upstairs before you embarrass yourself." "Oh, I'm not embarrassed, Beatrice," I said, walking toward the table. I looked directly at Haley. Haley looked up at me, her expression a mix of pity and triumph. Up close, she looked even younger and even more out of her depth. She was wearing a diamond necklace that looked suspiciously like one Owen had told me was in the shop for cleaning 3 weeks ago. "You must be Haley," I said, tilting my head. "Owen has told me so little about you, probably because he was too busy pretending I didn't exist." Haley blinked, her lip trembling slightly. "Owen said you were just staying here until the paperwork was finished. He said you were a family friend helping with the restoration." "Is that what he said?" I looked at Owen. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his wine glass as if he could drown in it. "Owen," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Is that what I am, the help?" Beatrice stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "That's enough. Caroline, you are making a scene in front of our guests. This house has a reputation to uphold. A legacy, something you clearly don't respect." "A legacy?" I laughed. "Beatrice, look around. You're eating off my grandmother's china. You're sitting in a chair I rebuilt with my own 2 hands. You're drinking wine that was charged to my business credit card because Owen's accounts are currently overdrawn by $5,000. The table went silent. One of the guests, a portly man in a tuxedo, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Now, see here," Beatrice hissed, leaning across the table. "Owen is a Vance. This house has been in his family for 4 generations. It is his birthright. You were just the temporary caretaker. Haley is the one who will actually lead this family into the next decade. She has the breeding, the grace, and the support of the community." "She's a yoga instructor, Beatrice," I said flatly. "And while I'm sure her breeding is impeccable, it doesn't pay the property taxes, which, by the way, were due yesterday. I paid them from my personal account." Owen finally looked up. "Caroline, stop it. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Just go away." "I'm not going anywhere, Owen," I said, reaching into the fold of my dress and pulling out the navy blue folder. I laid it on the table, right next to the turkey. "Because if anyone is going away tonight, it's not going to be me." I looked at Beatrice, whose face was now a mask of confusion and growing dread. "You keep talking about the Vance legacy," I said, "but you forgot to check the fine print on that legacy. You thought Owen bought this place back. You thought he was the one who saved the family name." I opened the folder to the deed and turned it toward the table. "Look at the name on the title, Beatrice. Look at it very carefully." The silence that followed my revelation wasn't just quiet, it was a physical weight, pressing down on the polished mahogany of the dining table. I watched the color drain from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking every bit her 62 years. Beside her, Owen looked like he had been struck dumb, his mouth hanging open in a silent, horrified "oh." I didn't sit down. I stood there, my hand resting firmly on the navy blue folder, the emerald velvet of my sleeve catching the flickering candlelight. I felt a strange, cold power surging through me, a sharp contrast to the fever that had tried to claim me only hours before. I was no longer the frail, sick wife hiding in the attic. I was the architect of this room, the owner of these walls, and the only person in the house with the truth on her side. "You're lying," Beatrice finally whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "That's impossible," Owen told me. He said the Vance Trust had been restructured. He said the property was secured in his name to ensure the lineage. "Owen says a lot of things, Beatrice," I said, my voice steady and low. "He says he's a luxury car consultant, yet I haven't seen a commission check in 18 months. He says he's working late with clients, yet his GPS logs, which I have, by the way, show him parked at a boutique hotel downtown 3 nights a week. And he clearly told you a fairy tale about this house." I turned my gaze to Owen. "Did you really think I wouldn't protect myself? After the third time a debt collector showed up at our door for one of your investment opportunities, I knew I couldn't leave my hard-earned assets in your hands. I moved everything into a private trust. My trust. I am the sole beneficiary, the sole trustee, and the sole owner. You are a guest here, Owen, a guest who has overstayed his welcome." Owen finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "Caroline, you can't do this. This is a marriage. Everything is shared. You used my family's name to get the permits for the restoration." "I used my reputation and my money," I interrupted. "The Vance name was a liability in this town until I cleaned it up. And as for shared, let's talk about what you've been sharing." I reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. I didn't hand them to him, I fanned them out on the table like a deck of cards. They were grainy but clear: Owen and Haley at a cafe, Owen and Haley entering a jewelry store, Owen and Haley laughing as he helped her into his car, the car I paid the insurance on. "I didn't just stay in bed this week because of the flu," I told the stunned table. "I stayed in bed because I was waiting for the final report from my friend Sarah. Some of you might know her, Sarah Miller. She's a private investigator now, and she's exceptionally good at her job. She's been following Owen for 3 weeks. I had called Sarah the moment I realized Owen's late nights were becoming a pattern. We had been friends since college, and when I told her I suspected my husband was trying to find a way to cut me out of the estate I'd built, she went to work. Sarah didn't just find Haley," I continued, looking at the young woman who was now clutching her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. "She found the trail of lies Owen told her. She found the bank accounts he opened in his mother's name to hide the money he was skimming from our joint business expenses. And she found out exactly why Beatrice was so eager to introduce a new woman into the mix." I looked at Beatrice, who was now clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. "You knew he was broke, didn't you, Beatrice? You knew his consulting was a sham. You thought if you could get him married off to a girl with a trust fund of her own like Haley, you could keep living in this house and pretending the Vances were still royalty. You were selling a house you didn't own to a girl who didn't know she was being used as a bank." The room remained frozen. The elite guests were looking anywhere but at us. Some were intensely interested in their silverware, while others stared at the ceiling. The illusion of the Grand Vance Christmas was shattered, replaced by the tawdry reality of a family of grifters being caught in the act. "I've spent the last few days on the phone with my lawyer, Arthur," I said, my voice gaining strength. "He's already drafted the eviction notices, not just for Owen, but for you too, Beatrice. Since you decided to move into the guest wing without an invitation 6 months ago, I figured it was time to make it official." Owen stood up then, his chair toppling backward and hitting the floor with a dull thud. "You think you're so smart, Caroline. You think you can just kick us out. This is my home. My grandfather lived here. My father lived here. And they both lost it. I shouted back, the first time I had raised my voice. I bought it back from the bank. I saved it from being turned into condos. I am the only reason this roof is over your head tonight, and I am the only reason it's being taken away. I felt a wave of dizziness. The fever wasn't entirely gone, but I forced myself to stand tall. I had moved from being the victim of their plot to being the commander of their downfall. I wasn't just defending myself, I was conducting a surgical removal of the cancer that had invaded my life. "Haley, dear," I said, my tone shifting to a mock-sympathetic lilt. "I truly feel for you. I really do. You've been told that you were moving into a historic legacy. You were told you were the chosen one to lead this family. But did Owen mention the $300,000 in personal debt he's accumulated? Did he mention that he's currently being investigated for fraud by his former clients?" Haley looked at Owen, her eyes wide and searching. "Owen, is that true? You said the business was flourishing. You said the estate was yours." Owen turned to her, his face a mask of desperate sincerity. "Haley, she's crazy. She's sick, she has a fever, she's hallucinating. She's always been jealous of my family's history. She's trying to destroy us because she knows I'm leaving her." "Hallucinating?" I laughed, pulling a legal-sized document from the folder. "Is this a hallucination, Owen?" "It's a copy of the lien placed on your consulting office last month. And this is a statement from the bank showing that you tried to forge my signature to take out a second mortgage on this house 4 days ago." The gasp that came from the table was audible. Forgery was a word that even Beatrice's high society friends couldn't ignore. "The bank called me Owen," I said, savoring the look of pure terror on his face. "They know my signature. They also know that I'm the only person authorized to make changes to the trust. They flagged the application immediately. I told them not to call the police. Yet, I wanted to see if you'd actually go through with this dinner tonight. I wanted to see how far you and your mother would go." Beatrice lunged across the table, her hand swinging toward my face. I stepped back easily, and she ended up sprawling against the centerpiece, her sleeve catching in the gravy boat. "You're a common thief," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You stole this house from us. You manipulated my son into marriage just so you could get your hands on our history." "Your history was a pile of unpaid bills and rotting wood, Beatrice," I said, looking down at her. "I didn't steal anything. I paid for it. Every nail, every shingle, every hour of labor. If you want history, you can go find it at the local library. You won't find it here anymore." Owen moved toward me, his hands balled into fists. For a second, I saw a flash of real violence in his eyes. "Give me those papers, Caroline. Give them to me right now." "Or what?" I asked, not flinching. "You'll hit me, in front of all these witnesses, in front of your new woman. Go ahead, Owen. Give Haley a real look at the man she's supposed to spend her life with." He stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at Haley, who was now standing up, her purse clutched to her chest. She looked horrified not by me, but by the pathetic, sweating man standing in front of her. "Owen," she whispered, "my father. He invested $50,000 with you last week for the restoration of the North Wing. You said it was a guaranteed return." I tilted my head. "The North Wing was finished 2 years ago, Haley, with my money. I don't know where that $50,000 went, but I can guess." I looked at Owen's wrist, at the gold watch he'd been checking so frequently. "Nice watch, by the way. Is that the North Wing edition?" Haley's face went from pale to a deep, burning red. She looked at Beatrice, then at Owen, and finally at the expensive dinner she hadn't even finished. "You used me," she said, her voice shaking. "You and your mother, you used my family." "No, Haley, sweetheart, listen," Beatrice started, reaching for the girl's hand. "Don't touch me." Haley snapped. She turned and ran toward the foyer, the sound of the front door slamming echoing through the house like a gunshot. One by one, the other guests began to stand up. There were no apologies, no polite goodbyes. They moved like ghosts, hurrying toward the coat rack, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Vance family name. "Wait!" Beatrice cried out, trying to catch the sleeve of the man in the tuxedo. "This is all a misunderstanding. Caroline is unstable." The man pulled his arm away, his expression one of pure disgust. "I think we've seen enough, Beatrice. Good night." Within minutes, the grand dining room was empty, save for the three of us. The candles were burning low, the turkey was cold, and the silence was back, but this time it was the silence of a tomb. Owen sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Beatrice was still leaning against the table, her mink coat stained with gravy, looking like a discarded doll. "It's over, Owen," I said, walking to the head of the table, the seat Beatrice had occupied. I sat down and folded my hands. "The guests are gone, Haley is gone, and tomorrow the police are going to be asking questions about that $50,000 you took from her father." "You wouldn't," Owen groaned into his palms. "You'd be destroying your own husband." "My husband died a long time ago," I said. "The man I'm looking at is just a fraud who happens to share my last name for the time being. And as for destroying you, you did that yourself. I'm just the one providing the evidence." I pulled out the final piece of paper from the folder. It was a report from Sarah Miller, but this one wasn't about Haley. It was a list of names. "Sarah did a deep dive into your consulting history, Owen. Do you remember a woman named Lydia in Chicago or Susan in Atlanta? It seems you have a very specific pattern. You find women with independent means, you charm your way into their lives, and you consult them until their bank accounts are empty. Then you move on." Owen's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with a new kind of fear, the fear of a man who realizes his past has finally caught up with his present. "I'm the first one who didn't just let you walk away, aren't I?" I asked. "I'm the first one who actually owned the property you were trying to flip. You thought because I was just a furniture designer, I wouldn't understand the legalities of a property trust. You thought I was too busy sanding wood to notice you were sanding down our life." "Caroline, please," Beatrice whimpered, her voice losing all its sharp edges. "Think of the scandal, the papers. Everyone will know. We can fix this. We can say it was a private dispute. I'll make Owen apologize. He'll make it right." "He can't make it right, Beatrice. He doesn't have the money to make it right, and he doesn't have the character. And as for the scandal, I don't care. I've spent years worrying about what people thought of the Vances. From now on, I only care about what people think of Caroline." I stood up and walked to the sideboard, picking up a glass of water. My fever felt like it was finally breaking, a cool sweat coating my skin. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "Owen, you are going to pack a single suitcase. You will leave your keys on the table. You will leave the watch. I'm sure Haley's father will want it as a down payment on his $50,000. You will leave the car. You will walk out that door tonight." "It's Christmas Eve," Beatrice cried. "Where is he supposed to go?" "I don't care," I said. "Maybe he can consult with a park bench. And you, Beatrice, you have until noon tomorrow. If you are still in this house by 12:01 p.m., I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. I've already contacted the security company. The codes will be changed at midnight." Owen looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved. But it was like looking at a photograph of someone who had been dead for a decade. There was no connection left, no bridge to cross. "You're a monster," he whispered. "No, Owen," I replied, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. "I'm the owner, and it's time for the tenants to leave." I watched as he slowly stood up. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at the house he had tried to steal. He walked toward the stairs, his shoulders slumped, the charcoal suit I'd bought him looking 2 sizes too big. Beatrice stayed where she was, staring at the empty chairs. The woman who had spent her life planning events was finally facing one she couldn't control. I walked out of the dining room and into the foyer. I looked up at the grand staircase, at the beautiful, restored wood that glowed in the light of the Christmas tree. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a burden. It didn't feel like a project or a legacy I had to protect. It felt like home, and it was finally, truly mine. Christmas morning dawned with a clarity that was almost painful. The snow had stopped falling during the night, leaving the gables wrapped in a thick, silent shroud of white. I woke up at 7:00 a.m., the fever finally a memory. My body felt light, my mind sharp, and my heart, for the first time in years, felt entirely unburdened. I dressed with deliberate care. This wasn't a day for emerald velvet. It was a day for the armor of a businesswoman. I chose a crisp white silk blouse and charcoal gray trousers, my hair pulled back into a tight, professional knot. As I descended the stairs, I heard the clatter of china from the dining room. I walked in to find Beatrice. She had spent the night in the guest wing, and apparently she hadn't spent it packing. She was in a fresh floral dress, directing a catering crew I hadn't authorized to set out a lavish breakfast buffet. "What is this, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. She didn't even look up from the centerpiece she was adjusting. "It's the Christmas morning charity coffee, Caroline. I've been organizing this with the Historic Society for 6 months. The mayor is coming. The board of trustees is coming. I will not have my reputation ruined because of your hysterics last night." I looked at the catering staff, local people I knew, people who looked uncomfortable being caught in the middle of a family war. "I'm sorry," I said to the lead server. "There's been a change of plans. Please pack everything up. You'll be paid in full, but this event is canceled." "Don't you dare," Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This is a Vance tradition. You cannot stop this." "I don't have to stop it, Beatrice," I said, checking my watch. "The truth will do that for me." At exactly 9:00 a.m., the front door chime rang. Beatrice smoothed her dress and rushed to the foyer, her face morphing into a mask of gracious hospitality. She opened the door to find not just the president of the Historic Society, but also Mr. Sterling, Haley's father, and 2 officers from the local precinct. The foyer of the Gables became a stage. The president of the society, a woman named Mrs. Gable, ironically enough, stood there with a look of profound confusion. Mr. Sterling, however, looked like he was vibrating with a silent, tectonic rage. "Beatrice," Mrs. Gable began, "we received a very disturbing call this morning from Caroline's attorney. He mentioned that the house isn't, well, that the Vance Trust is no longer the owner." "It's a lie," Beatrice cried, her eyes darting toward the stairs where Owen was slowly descending, looking disheveled and broken. "It's a bitter woman's attempt to steal our heritage." I stepped forward into the center of the foyer, the light from the grand chandelier reflecting in the polished wood floors I had sanded myself. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm and resonant. "I apologize for the confusion, but I invited you all here for a reason. Mrs. Gable, you've always wanted to see the full restoration of this house. Today, you're going to see the restoration of the truth." I turned to Mr. Sterling. "Arthur sent you the documents, I assume." Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Owen. "He did, and I've spent the morning reviewing my own books. Owen, you told me the $50,000 was a legacy investment to secure a seat on the board of the new Vance Foundation. A foundation that doesn't exist. A foundation tied to a house you don't own." Owen reached the bottom step, his hand trembling on the banister. It was a temporary loan, Richard. I was going to pay it back once the trust was settled." "The trust was settled 4 years ago, Owen," I said, handing a folder to the police officers. "The moment I bought this house out of foreclosure. These are the records of the trust, the bank's report on the forged signature for the second mortgage, and a detailed list of the funds Owen has diverted from my business accounts to pay for his personal lifestyle, including the jewelry he gave your daughter, Mr. Sterling." The public humiliation was systematic and absolute. Mrs. Gable and the members of the society watched in horrified silence as the Vance legacy was stripped bare. They saw not a proud family of means, but a desperate mother and a fraudulent son who had been living a lie funded by the woman they treated like a servant. "Officers," I said, looking at the men in uniform. "The bank has already filed the formal complaint regarding the forgery. Mr. Sterling has his own statement to make regarding the investment fraud. And as the owner of this property, I am formally requesting that Owen and Beatrice be escorted from the premises. They have had 12 hours to pack. Anything left behind will be donated to charity." Beatrice let out a sound that wasn't human, a low, guttural moan of defeat. She looked at Mrs. Gable, her friend of 30 years, and saw only pity and revulsion. The social exile she had feared her entire life had finally arrived, and it was happening on the very stage she had built for her triumph. Owen didn't fight. He looked at the handcuffs being pulled from the officer's belt and simply held out his wrists. He looked at me one last time, and for a fleeting second, I saw the ghost of the man I had married, the one who could have been someone if he hadn't been so obsessed with being of Vance. "I'm sorry, Caroline," he whispered. "I know you are Owen," I said, "but sorry doesn't pay for the wood, and it certainly doesn't pay for the time." As the police led him out into the bright, cold Christmas morning, and as Mr. Sterling and the members of the society followed, whispering amongst themselves, the foyer finally went silent. The catering crew had vanished. The food was gone. Beatrice stood by the open door, her mink coat clutched to her chest. She looked at me, her face pale and trembling. "You've destroyed everything," she said. "No, Beatrice," I replied, walking toward the door to close it. "I've finally finished the restoration. I just had to get rid of the dry rot first." I closed the door on her, the heavy oak clicking into place with a sound of finality that echoed through the empty house. The house felt different now. It didn't feel like a museum or a burden or a battleground. It felt like space. Huge, airy, light-filled space that belonged to no one but me. I spent the rest of Christmas Day in a way I hadn't in years, in silence. I didn't cook a 10-course meal. I didn't entertain a single elite guest. I made myself a simple sandwich, sat in the bay window of the library, and watched the sun set over the snowy hills. Owen was processed and released on bail late that night, funded, I heard later, by a small retirement account Beatrice had kept hidden. But the damage was done. The forgery charges and the fraud investigation by Mr. Sterling made him radioactive in this town. He and Beatrice moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of the tracks, far away from the Vance legacy. A week later, my friend Sarah came over. We sat in the kitchen, the one I had designed with a double oven and a farm sink, and drank coffee that actually tasted good because I wasn't drinking it while worrying about Owen's credit card bills. "So," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair, "what's next for the Gables, now that the tenants are gone?" I looked around the room. Every crown molding, every floorboard, every custom-built cabinet was a testament to my skill. "I'm turning the north wing into a studio," I said. "A real one. I'm going to hire 2 apprentices and start taking on the bigger restoration projects I had to turn down because I was too busy keeping this place afloat for Owen. And the rest of the house. I'm living in it," I smiled. "I'm going to fill it with people I actually like. I'm going to have Sunday dinners with my friends. I'm going to host workshops for local craftspeople. This house is going to be a home, Sarah, not a trophy." I walked her to the door, and as she left, I paused on the porch. The air was crisp and clean. I thought about the woman I was 3 years ago, the one who thought her worth was tied to the name she took at the altar. I thought about the woman who had shivered in the dark with a fever, afraid to confront the people who were stealing her life. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew exactly what she was worth, down to the last cent and the last second of her time. I went back inside and locked the door. It was a new year, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't fixing something that was broken. I was building something new. And I started by taking the Vance nameplate off the front gate and throwing it into the snow.